Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday from 9 to 10 o'clock. We either talk about economic issues or try to crack a mouse with our head. For those of you that missed the morning show, too bad. You got to you could have joined Facebook Live and watched Bonnie try to beat the world record for cracking mice with your head. She came close. I think the record is 2, and she got really close. I think she got 1, but I'm sure tomorrow she can break that record, and we'll have a new Guinness record. But anyway, for those of you that are new to this show, too bad. There's other channels on the dial, but this program on Wednesdays is, this, like I always say, it's whatever I want to talk about because I'm paying. And that's the way it works in economics. If you're paying, you kind of control the transaction. And so that's what we talk about here on Wednesdays is some of the things that happen in the world, some of the situations happen, and some of the myths and some of the truths relative to economics and some of the things that might be impacting you. And you think, well, that doesn't make a big difference in my daily life. I don't really think about that or care about that. And frankly, a lot of times people don't see what effect it has. But every action in the market does create some sort of counteraction or some resulting action. And it is important to understand what's going to happen. For example, taxes. Taxes are a cost from an economic standpoint. Most of us think about taxes as something that's that's based on our income. And so we think of it as, it's just something we have to pay. It's not really a cost, it's a tax, right? But in reality, taxes are a cost for anybody, but particularly for business. They represent a cost of doing business that the business has to cover or they go out of business. So, for example, if I have a increase in my taxes, whether they're payroll taxes, income taxes, or whatever, if I have an increase in those, I have to find a way to pass those taxes along to whoever buys or uses my service or product, or I will go broke. I will go out of business, either because I can't pay my personnel because I'm not making enough money to pay them, or because I won't make enough money myself to survive. And so it will make sense for me to go into some other line of business where I can make an income. And that's kind of where we're at right now from an economy standpoint. It really bothers me is that we have a number of issues that are existing in the economy right now that I see as a kind of a problem coming up in the very near future. And what I'm getting at is that we've got ourselves in a situation that small business generates jobs. Wall Street, I think pretty much everybody knows Wall Street is either doing well or, just a large crap game that nobody cares about. And we're all rolling die right now to see what the outcome is. I kind of lately have been favoring the latter because I'm not sure that there's a direct connection between Main Street and Wall Street. And I don't think that there's any kind of, so the fact that we're seeing some of these big corporations doing well, I'm not so sure that that is a reflection necessarily of how small business is doing. And it's important because if small business doesn't survive, jobs don't survive. The large corporations, they have many, many alternatives in terms of spreading their cost around. So as I've said a number of times on the show, and it is an economic fact that corporations do not pay taxes. corporations don't pay taxes. Only individuals pay taxes. So corporations, if they're charged a tax, they become a pass-through. And I'm not talking about S corps and partnerships. I'm talking about publicly traded companies, the Apples and Amazons and all of those. If you tax them, let's say you doubled their tax, tripled their tax, quadrupled their tax, it does not get you any more money, because what are they going to do? They're going to increase the price of their product. Um, and and if they're in a competitive environment, there's other competitors out there that are as big and as strong as them. They may not be able to pass some of that cost along. So if one of their competitors is not being taxed because they're, say, overseas, and they're not subject to the tax in the U.S., then that competitor is going to have a lower cost structure. And so at that point, if there's a lot of competition and a lot of companies that are outside the United States and aren't facing that tax, they will have a competitive advantage over the U.S. company. They will be able to charge a lower price for the same quality of product. And at that point, jobs will go overseas. So what will happen is we'll lose jobs. So that corporation, again, will reduce its cost by losing jobs. Ultimately, if it loses jobs and loses enough business, it will shut down. But it won't pay tax. It isn't paying the tax. It is just taking money out of the labor so that so jobs are moving away. It won't need as much labor because it won't have as much business. And if it doesn't have as much business, there's not a profit to return to the shareholders. If there's no profit to return to the shareholders leave. And you say, well, how can they leave? Well, because they're all pension plans and retirement plans and union pension plans and all of these kind of things. And those plans are not, they're not some person sitting at home clipping coupons. They're everybody. They're all of us that have jobs that are saving money for retirement. And we have to save, and we have to put a certain amount of money for retirement away. And if we don't get a return on that money, we need to find something that's going to produce a better return. So what happens is that the very people that were supposedly trying to help the working person, the member of a union, the teacher, the auto worker, all of those, we're going to punish them either by trying to reduce their return on their investment. And at that point, they actually will sell and leave and go and invest in a foreign country, in a foreign company, or they will lose their job. And so now they're unemployed. So it's really important to understand when people, and I'm using that term loosely because I'm referring to politicians, that people who talk about taxing corporations and taxing the wealthy do not understand that when you tax a corporation, all you're doing is passing that cost along in terms of lost jobs, lost labor, lower material costs, which right now means buying overseas, buying China, buying India, buying someplace where their labor costs are lower. So you're either going to lose jobs, you're going to have an inferior product, or be dependent upon a company in a foreign country to provide that product, which we have found is not really a good thing when it comes to international politics, or the company is going to increase their price. And there's the kicker, is that you say, well, to increase their price, who's paying that? Well, most of the time, that's the working person that can't, that doesn't have alternatives and doesn't have a discretionary wage. So inflation tends to tax the poor, and particularly the working poor, but especially the poor. It tends to tax the poor the greatest. And here's why. If I put a tax on somebody making under $50,000 a year, and they got a couple kids, I may give them some credits. I've got some things that I can do to offset their income tax. And they're going to know they need that help because all of a sudden they get this tax bill and they know they can't pay it. So they need some kind of benefit. So we give them a tax break, right? So what we think is, well, we'll give them a tax break and we'll do that by taxing corporations. So we'll tax the corporations and then we'll give the money to the people. And will that will help. That will be an answer. But no, it won't, because that company, whatever it makes, whatever it does, will raise its price, especially if it doesn't have competition. And let's face it, a lot of these publicly traded companies are so large that there are not major competitors out there against them. So when we start protecting Wall Street, we're really protecting corporations that are monopolies. We shouldn't be protecting them. We should be regulating them. But beyond all of that, let's say that we do allow that we just tax that corporation and it has the opportunity, it raises its price. Well, that price is that tax. That tax is being pushed through in a higher priced product. Now, if it's food, it's medicine, who's got the least who needs food? Who has food as a item that everybody needs, right? It is not a discretionary item. The more money I've got, the more money I can afford to bear the cost of that increase through inflation. But if I'm making $50,000 a year and I'm trying to just get by and I got a couple kids, yeah, you gave me a break on my income tax, but it ended up in all of the products I have to buy because everything I'm buying now costs more. So at that point, how did that help me out? If it just, what it did is it was a shell game that politicians played with me to try to convince me that they were helping me because I can see my income tax credit. Oh, I reduced my income taxes. But I don't realize, because I don't study economics, I don't realize that, hey, everything's gone up in cost. Everything's more expensive. Gee, and I might kind of understand that a little bit, but I don't understand why. I don't understand. It's because the government tried to tax a corporation and corporations can't pay the tax. Or how about this situation? I don't make $50,000 anymore. I only make $40,000. Why? Because they cut shifts down or they've gone to some kind of program so they don't have to pay overtime because they got to reduce their costs. So now they're backlogged on goods and because they're not working the overtime. They've reduced their labor costs so they can pay their taxes. But I'm out of job, or I'm making less than I was before. Or maybe the job I get, maybe my company got put out of business by the process. They couldn't compete. They got put out of business. And so now I end up going to work for another company in another industry, and I'm making less than I should. I'm underpaid. We remember the Great Recession. One of the disadvantages of the Great Recession is people had jobs, but they had jobs at levels well below their capacity. You had people with advanced skills, with advanced trade skills, with advanced school skills, education skills. You had all of these kind of people who were working at jobs just to survive, and so they were working at levels much lower. Doing side jobs at much cheaper prices, just to stay employed. So that is an effect of government redistribution of wealth. It does not end up where you think it does. It ends up where the politicians know it's going to end up. Don't you ever be fooled that politicians don't understand that inflation is the easiest tax to foist on the consumer, because people don't understand that. They don't see it. They don't put the two together. They don't put together the tax credit they got with the increase in prices. Everything's going up. My rent went up. My food's gone up. My gas bill's gone up. My electric has gone up. Everything's gone up. All these things have gone up. They don't understand. It's exactly because of the fact that they got that credit on their tax return. They can see the credit and they're thankful to the person that gave it to them, because they gave them some money. They helped them out, not realizing that they're spending every single dime of that credit just to survive because of inflation, because of the tax of inflation. And that is an economic fact. That's what happens. Either you do not reduce the return to the investor. If you reduce the return to the investor in a publicly traded company, they will sell their stock and go to another company. And those won't always be US companies. They may invest in a Chinese company, a German company, some other company that now is available to them that isn't subject to that same tax or cost. Frankly, the only thing that keeps us from having that happen is that we generally have been able to avoid some of the taxes that exist around the world. We've avoided the VAT tax, which is the value added tax, where they decide how much value is added at each stage of production and they tax you on it. It's a quasi sales tax, but it's a sales tax on a non-sale, on just an increase in value. So if you're producing a product, a car, for example, and you've got the steel, you pay a tax on the steel, and then you add the frame and all of the tires, you'd pay a tax on that. And then when that gets customized and whatever happens with that, it gets delivered to the dealer, you got a tax on that. And ultimately, where does all that tax go? Well, it gets passed on to the consumer. How? Higher price, right? That's what happens. So now that car costs more money. That's the only thing. A lot of the European countries that have more social systems that we all say, oh, that's fantastic, also have all of these built-in costs that they're paying, and their consumers and their people end up paying all of that in terms of lower wages and lost jobs, and in general, just a higher priced goods and services. So you need to be well aware of the shell game, because that's what's being talked about right now. The big issues are how we're going to steal money from the average consumer and not let them know how that's happening. We're going to play a huge shell game with them so that we can show them where they're getting money back and they're not being taxed. So what happens is we end up with a situation where people who are making $400,000 a year or more are going to get taxed more. Now, think about this a minute. What else does inflation do? Well, all of a sudden, if there's inflation in the economy, all of a sudden the costs are going up for the employees of that business, right? Because they're a consumer as well of other people's businesses, and they're experiencing the same inflation. So what are they going to do? They're going to ask for a raise. They're going to ask for more money. And when they get more money, of course, that's going to raise the price of the product, their product, more, but they're going to get more money. And that's going to put them in a higher tax bracket. They're not able to buy anymore. Inflation isn't allowing them to buy more goods and services. It's allowing them to pay for the same goods and services that they were always buying, but just at a higher price because of inflation. So now what's the added benefit of passing inflation through to the consumer? I put them in a higher tax bracket. So now all of a sudden, that person who was making, let's say, $380,000 a year. All right, they're under the 4, so maybe they're not into this penalty tax we're going to talk about. But lo and behold, a year later, we have 10% inflation. Their wages are up 10% because they got a cost of living increase. So their wages are up by what? $38,000. So now they make 4 something, and they're one of the wealthy now. All of a sudden, they became wealthy. Did they become wealthy because they can buy more and earn more and whatever? No, they became wealthy because inflation said they were making more money. Inflation pushes the tax brackets higher. That's why very seldom do you see politicians index the tax code for inflation. Why? Because it's cheap dollars for them. More money they can extract from you without doing anything. And they can blame it on inflation. Oh, sorry. Has nothing to do with us. It's inflation. Or they can just say, well, you're doing better. You're making more money. You're doing better. You should be paying more taxes because you're making more money. The other thing that is like I said, is kind of interesting is that it's people that pay taxes. Even in the big corporations, it gets passed along, and the effect of taxes are felt in the major corporations by individuals, either through the silent tax of inflation or the hidden tax of inflation, or in a loss of jobs, the hidden tax of loss of jobs because of a cost increase, or other items that are passed through and ultimately affect the consumer, because it's the consumer, the individual, who ultimately bears the cost of all taxes. All they're not paid by any entity that passes it through. Now, pass through entities, partnerships, and S corps, where the person elects to pay the tax on their personal tax return rather than paying it on the company tax return, so they don't get double taxed. Uh, that that entity, that type of entity, they can't sell their stock. They can't sell their membership interest in their LLC, their partnership interest, their S corp stock. They can't sell that right away. They can't walk out and say, "Oh, I got an increase, so I'm going to sell my stock and I'm going to buy I'm an electrician, so I'm going to sell my company and I'm going to buy the electrician's company down the street because they're making more money than me." Well, you can't do that, or they're not being taxed the same as I am. You can't do that. So the small business owner is the one that does end up bearing that cost personally. They're going to bear it individually rather than it being spread in terms of over a wide group of people who lose their jobs or lose their. The individual business owner in the short run is going to pay that tax. Now, in the long run, they can't survive. They can't continue to take the risk. For example, if I can make $50,000 a year by working for somebody, and all I have to do is go in every day and do what I've been doing all the time, or I can make $50,000 a year, but I have to put my house up as collateral for the business to be able to borrow the money to pay everybody else's wages when there's a downturn in the economy, or I have to go out and get an EIDL loan that I got to pay off over 30 years, or I have to go out and not take a salary for a month or 3 months or 6 months because I don't have enough cash flow right now to pay everybody else. Why would I do that? So I can say I own a business that I don't have any control of and don't make any money from, that I don't have any, that all I get is the ability to not take a salary, to use my home as collateral. Why should I do that? And the only way I would do that is if I see that I'm going to be able to either make some money in the long run when I sell the business or retire, or I see an opportunity to ultimately make more money, and it's short term. But if we change the tax structure, and there's never the opportunity, as soon as that, if we've decided that 400,000 is as wealthy as somebody should be, and we should take away their income above that level, which, by the way, I got to give Biden credit. He actually put a number down, which everybody knew what it was based on the tax code. He's the first person that has come out and indicated that $400,000 and above are the top 1%. Those are the people we keep telling we should take all their income away. Think about that a minute. Do you know somebody that makes $400,000 a year jointly between two people? I do. I know a number of them locally here, right? I frankly know more of those people who make over $400,000 a year. They're not rich. They're barely getting by. Because why? Because income is different than cash. If I make $400,000 a year in a business, I don't get cash of $400,000. I get probably enough cash to pay my taxes, and that's about it. I'm not making $400,000 of take-home pay. Now, if I've got a job working for some big Wall Street company and I make $400,000, that's a different story. They give me that in cash. I get paid, a couple times a month, and other than taxes, they give me that actual cash. I get to take it all out. They have to figure out where they're going to get the cash from. In small business, that cash is reinvested in the business. Some portion of that is always going to stay in the business. It's permanent capital in the business, and you can't take it out. So you're going to pay tax on it so that you don't have to pay tax on it when you do take it out. But let's face it, frankly, you're probably never going to take that out unless the economy goes in the toilet again and you start having to live off of it because you don't have future business. There's no reason to leave any money in the business. You suck it out of the business while you're going in a downturn. That's why it's funny. In a downturn, businesses have cash initially. They don't realize they're getting hit because they now have more cash than they had before, because they don't have to pay wages because there's no work being done. They don't have to pay for materials because there's no materials being ordered. So they have more cash because the money that they've left in the business, they're now able to pull out. The problem is they're doomed. You're heading down, and eventually there's going to reach a point where you don't have any cash because you don't have any income. And unless the things turn around, you're in trouble. The other problem is, and this is what we're seeing right now, is businesses that have come through the 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 recession, 13, 14, 15, through that recession of that very short period of time, they have a situation now where they're trying to rebuild their capital, because now as they're growing, now as they were having business in the economy, they had to have more working capital to be able to grow that business. And here's what I'm talking about. If, let's say my sales are $1.2 million a year. I said $1.2 million. That's a lot of businesses around here that probably do $1.2 million. So I'm doing $1.2 million, and that means that I'm doing $100,000 a month in sales. So I've got $100,000 a month in monthly sales on $1.2 million income. Now, if I sell a product, right, and it takes me 15 days to collect, let's say, and that's probably good because sometimes it's 30, but let's say I'm in a business that I collect in 15 days. So I'm going to make a sale to a customer and I'm going to collect in 15 days. But 15 days before that, I had to buy the materials, incur the labor, and I had to do all of the things that were necessary to get that business, to get that product there. Probably maybe even a little before that, maybe 30 days ahead of time. I had to start creating that product or making that product that I'm selling. So I've got all my costs already paid, and I'm not going to get my money until 15 days after I sell it. So I've got 30 days, maybe 45, but let's say I've got 30 days that I have already expended my money. I've already incurred the cost, and I haven't gotten my cash yet, right? Well, where did that money come from to expend that cost? Where did that money come from? Well, it had to come from money I left in the business or put in the business. So I either had to go borrow money to have it in there. I had to leave profits in so that I could use that money to pay. I had to inject my own capital. I had to take money out of my savings and put it back in. Most likely, I didn't borrow all of it from the banks because the banks won't fund all of that. They're not going to fund all your working capital. They'll fund some portion of it, but they're not going to fund all of it. They want to see some skin in the game. They want to see you putting your house up as collateral. So you're borrowing against your house in effect. They want to see some other things that they can have as security. So bottom line, I've got $100,000 invested in my business that I get no return on. I've got $100,000 that I've kept it. So I may have made $400,000 this year on that $1.2 million. I may have made $400,000, but $100,000 of it I don't get to keep. It's in my business, permanently in my business, until I close my business down or ratchet it down. It's going to be in my business. So, but I paid tax on 400. I didn't get 400. I got 300. So I paid tax on 400. So let's say I paid 50% tax on 400,000. So I paid $200,000 in tax. But on cash, I only got 300 in cash because I had to leave the other cash in there, right? So I only got 300,000 in cash. Um, and so of that 300, I had to pay $200,000 out in taxes. So my effective tax rate is not 50%, it's 67%. It's 2/3, not a half, 2/3. That is the hidden tax that people pay in a small business. And so when somebody says, "Oh, we're going to only tax you 40%." Well, yeah, maybe not. Because most likely that 40% is going to be much larger than that. When it's figured on the amount of cash that I have available. And trust me, um, you can't spend profits. I can't go into my local grocery store and show them my tax return and say, "See, I made $400,000 this year. Just give me some food." I'll give you a portion of this. I'll give you a portion of this, this money that I didn't take out of the business. You can have that someday. I'm going to set that aside for you. You might not get it for 20 years, but I'm going to set that aside for you. So I'm going to pay you with my tax return. That would be really cool, right? Walk in and say, "Hey, here's how we're going to do this." But that's what happens. So my effective cost as a business owner is much higher than it is if I was an employee. So at some point, when you take the reward side of the equation out, then there is no reason for anyone to own a business. And if no one owns a business, there are no jobs created. Government doesn't create jobs. Government doesn't create income. They don't produce products. They shift money around. They do not produce anything. The private sector does. Now, the government can intercept the private sector from time to time and try to say that they're in business and making a profit. But what are they doing? They're really taxing you because they're charging you, the taxpayer, for some services. Who pays for that? Well, you pay for it. So all they did was charge you for something that they called a service that you needed so that they could make a profit. Well, what are profits in a government? They're taxes. So all they did was tax you so that they could give that money to somebody else. Government does not create wealth. They redistribute it. Businesses create wealth. The money that those businesses that those individuals have to leave in there, they create wealth. That creates wealth. Now, if you're going to lose all that wealth, and that's the flip side, that's the sad side of what's going on, is that the government is talking about, and has consistently anyway, confiscated most of that wealth when you retire. So let's say, what do I mean by that? So let's say I have a business, this business that's got $1.2 million in sales. And let's say that I've been in this business for 40 years. And I've built this business up over 40 years. And now it's worth $2.5 million. Double my annual sales just about. So it's worth about $2.5 million. And I sell it. So I sell it for $2.5 million. What happens when that happens? Well, what's going to happen is I'm going to be taxed. And I'm going to be taxed as if I make $2.5 million a year every year of my life. But I'm only going to make it once in my life when I sell my business. So that $2.5 million is not my annual profit. It's not my annual income. It's my total income over the last 40 years. It's a one-time payment for 40 years worth of work. It's all of that money that I haven't been able to get, that I've had to put aside. And now all of a sudden, for one day in 1 year of my lifetime, I'm rich. And I'm making I'm up there with the big guys, right? So at that point, I'm going to pay taxes like I was making this every year, but I don't. And that's the secret behind the 1%. It's not the same people every year, not even close to the same people every year. The top 1%, to a large degree, are business owners that sell their business and they make that money one time. So if I confiscate all of that income, through, let's say, an 80% tax because I decide that the truly wealthy that make $2.5 million a year should pay 80%. No capital gains, no nothing. They should pay 80%. Well, so what happened? Well, I wasn't able to put any money in my retirement account over the years because all my money is invested in my business. All my employees, they were able to put some money aside, and frankly, I was matching it. So they were actually getting, a 50% return on their money. So now that they got this big IRA account or 401k account that they've now converted to an IRA account, I have nothing but my business, and I'm going to sell it for $2.5 million. The government's going to take 80% of that, and I'm going to be left with $2 million, with $500,000. So for 40 years of my life, I get paid $500,000. What, 10, 12, 15,000 a year? Not worth it, right? And if that is the way that it's going to be, and people start figuring that out, which they will, why would anybody want to own a business? Nobody will want to own a business. If nobody wants to own a business and have that potential for reward because it doesn't exist anymore, what jobs are going to be created? Not that business is not going to create the jobs. Wall Street, probably they've moved a lot of their jobs overseas. So they're not going to create jobs. So who's creating jobs? Nobody. You're going to have a depression. You're going to have, until the system resets, or you have socialism, where people get forced reduction in benefits. That's what socialism is about. It's not redistribution of wealth, because there is no wealth left in a socialistic system. The wealth, government can't create wealth, it redistributes it. Once it redistributes it to the point that it doesn't make sense for somebody to work or to somebody to take a risk in a business because there is no reward, they won't work. They won't take the risk. Why would anybody? Why would you do that? At some point, why would you work 50 or 60 hours a week to keep your business going, to produce a product, to get it out there, to create jobs, to create 10 or 15 jobs, if you could sit home, do nothing, and get the same amount? I can give you the answer to that question. Go to Cuba. You'll see what happens. You'll see what it's like. That's exactly what happens over there. When I was over there, and it's 11 o'clock in the middle of a Wednesday. Said to the tour guide, gee, there's an awful lot of people on the street. Why are there so many people out? Is this lunchtime? Is it lunchtime? And the guy looked at his watch and saw what day it was and said, no. And I said, well, why aren't they at work? Oh, they just choose not to work. Those are the people that choose not to work. And I said, well, what's that all about? And he said, well, you get paid the same. So some people choose not to go in. A lot of people do go in because they're bored, but they don't put any effort into it. So I can understand that. If I'm getting paid the same as the guys sitting at home playing video games, which I don't have any video games, and that's actually the interesting thing there is that there is none of that stuff. You don't have any money. There's no consumer products. They're not home playing. You know what the activity for the young people, and I'm talking 16 to 25, 30, 35, the biggest activity that they have is after they've finished their work and hopefully can get home, which sometimes that may take hours because the transportation system there is free, but it's not available. So you wait an hour to 2 hours, to go 5 or 6 miles. That's why a lot of people are given jobs very close to their home and reassigned jobs very close to their home because they can't get there because the transportation system doesn't work, because they can't afford buses because nobody's paying for those buses. There's no income to pay for those buses. So the biggest activity for these people between 16 and 30, 35 is to go to the square and drink Cuba Libras, which is rum and Coke. They have rum in a. I can guarantee you that in a place like that you have enough rum and and they have Coke. So that's a Cuba Libre, is rum and Coke, and they drink those until they pass out and go home, and then start the whole process over again. And they might listen to some music, and that's it. That's what you do. Uh, and that's what your life consists of, because that's all you have the money to do. You can't afford to buy anything. You're not going anywhere. You're not going out to dinner. You're not going to do any of that because you don't have any money to do any of that. You actually don't have dinner. You don't have any food. So, a little side note, Cuba is the largest per capita consumer of rice. Now, per capita, some of the Oriental locations, China, uh, Japan, some of those places consume a higher volume of rice, but not a higher per capita consumption of rice. Cuba consumes more rice per capita than any other country in the world. Why? Because rice is filling and cheap. And that's what you get that's what they give you. They give you food. They just don't give you good food. They give you food that fills you up. You get a chicken. You don't get a frozen chicken. You don't get a cut up chicken because there's no refrigeration. You get a chicken that you get to kill. And then at one point in time, you have a meal, hopefully. You better eat it all because there's nothing left over. Families live together. Economically, it's very easy. Everybody gets housing. But the fact is, they don't get enough money to pay for anything relative to the housing. So most people end up living together. Families live together. Mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers. It's a great network. They have to take care of each other because there's no hospitals or nursing homes that they can afford to take care of these people. So, so everybody lives together. So that's what happens when you redistribute wealth to the point that there is no wealth, and there's no incentive. Nobody works. Why would you? And like I said, if you can make $50,000 a year, and you don't have to put your house up as collateral, and you don't have to, worry about how you're going to pay your own bills, and you don't have to worry about any of that because you get a paycheck, and then unless there's some other benefit, why would you do that? Well, it's because you're going to make more money, or you're going to have an opportunity to make some money when you sell your business. Well, if they're going to tax that all away, why do that? So it's kind of important to understand how wealth, and I'm talking about wealth in the economic terms, not in terms of, the political term of wealth and wealthy. I'm just talking about wealth is something that an individual owns that has value. And the only way you create wealth is to have somebody take a risk, and people won't take those risks if there is no reward, if there is no wealth to accumulate. And let's face it, wealth is after tax. It's not pre-tax. So if I've got something that's worth $10 million, it's got a value of $10 million. But when I sell it, I have to give $9,950,000 to the government. Let's say I have to do that. So I'm going to net $50,000. So what's my wealth? Is my wealth $10 million, or is my wealth $50,000? I think my wealth is $50,000, because if I'm not going to get to keep it, what difference does it make what it's worth? It's only worth whatever it's worth that I get to keep. And so true wealth is after tax. So if you increase taxes, you automatically decrease wealth. Let me say that again. If you increase taxes, you automatically decrease wealth. So since it's wealth in an economic sense, that is what keeps business going, keeps people taking risks and doing all of this. If you're going to reduce their wealth, I'm not talking about even taxing it, which was another proposal that was out there, is to tax wealth. And I gave you an example of, the $10 million, and I tax that. If I have something that's worth, $10 million, but I'm going to pay a tax on it of 5% a year for the next 20 years, does it have any value? No, I paid it all out in taxes, right? I paid it all out in wealth taxes. So again, be aware of the shell game they're playing. That shell game consists of, first of all, you need to understand that economically, governments do not generate profits. They do not generate income. They redistribute it. They take it from one and give it to the other. Two, to the extent that they show you their hand on taxes, you can guarantee that they're finding a way, or having to find a way, to pass through that tax to you in some other form that you won't recognize or can't calculate the extent of. That, my friends, is inflation. So watch when they tax you on inflation, because that is a significant flex. By the way, we have a fairly heavy level of inflation right now in the products that you buy. The package of goods and services that they base inflation on right now, the inflation rate is low. But when you carve out those items that people need, that they can't do without, there's a fairly hefty inflation rate going in that sector right now. And that's the real number that you need to be worried about. That's the tax that's coming through. That's the inflation number that's coming through. Many businesses are already allocating or are already anticipating that. They're already pushing it through as a price increase on some of the stuff that they know you need. So that's what's going on. And then the third thing is the reduction in wealth that is going to be incurred when taxes go up, because wealth is after tax. Tax is a cost. So if I have a tax increase, that's a cost increase, even if I hadn't recognized it yet because I haven't sold what they're going to tax me on. So my wealth has gone down. If wealth goes down to the point that it doesn't make any sense anymore, you're going to see people bailing before it goes down further. Watch how many businesses are going to be sold in the next 24 months. No matter who gets in office, watch how many businesses are going to be sold, because people are anticipating a tax increase. They're anticipating that their businesses will be worth less after tax because of increases in inflation and increases in taxes. So keep those in mind. Watch for those things. We'll talk about it in the future, but again, those are the kind of things that are going on right now out there. That's the shell game that the government's playing. Stay on top of it. Watch the shell, but I guarantee you can't win. Thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday morning, 9 to 10 o'clock, right here on WSTU Digital 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.